The real cost of getting into war with China. Earlier this year, Michael McCaul, the newly appointed chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives, expressed concern over the high probability of a conflict arising between China and Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific region during an interview with Fox News. In response to Washington's attempts to contain Beijing, China's foreign minister, Qin Gang, has warned of the possibility of a clash with the U.S. The Chinese Communist Party is worried about the escalating tension between the two superpowers and believes that the U.S. must cease its actions, or else conflict and confrontation are inevitable. The situation has become so precarious that Taiwan's president, Tsai Ing-wen, has convinced U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to meet her in the U.S. instead of hosting him in Taipei, over fears that such a visit could trigger military retaliation from Beijing. The possibility of a military conflict between the U.S. and China has grown more significant than ever before, as tensions between the two nations continue to rise. Such a conflict would not only be disastrous for both countries, but it could also have far-reaching consequences for the world at large. Given the extensive economic and political ties that bind these nations to the rest of the international community, the potential damage from any conflict could be catastrophic. With both countries having significant military capabilities, advanced weaponry, and substantial nuclear arsenals, the potential consequences of any conflict could be extremely high. In the event of a war between these two global superpowers, the result could be widespread destruction, loss of life, and a global economic collapse. This video will explore the potential military and industrial consequences of such a conflict. Compare it to other conflicts in history, look at each country's potential allies, and examine the possibility of a broader worldwide conflict should the US and China go to war. The military, industrial, and geopolitical ramifications should the US and China go to war. The prospect of a military conflict between the United States and China would have severe ramifications in various spheres of influence. The geopolitical, military, and industrial implications of such a war would be catastrophic for both countries and the world at large. In terms of military ramifications, both countries have significant military power, with the United States having the largest and most technologically advanced military in the world. On the other hand, China has been rapidly modernizing its military and has made significant strides in developing new weapons and technologies, such as hypersonic missiles and advanced cyber capabilities. In the event of a conflict, both sides would likely suffer significant losses and casualties. The U.S. military would have to contend with China's vast army and sophisticated anti-access and area denial (A2AD) capabilities, while China would have to face the U.S. Navy's advanced carrier strike groups and formidable air power. The use of advanced weapons, such as nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and biological weapons, would escalate the conflict and cause significant loss of life and long-term environmental damage. In terms of industrial ramifications, the United States and China have an interdependent economic relationship. Both countries are each other's largest trading partners and rely on each other for critical components in various industries, including technology and manufacturing. A war between the two countries would disrupt global supply chains and have a significant impact on the global economy. Additionally, many companies have operations in both countries, and a conflict would lead to the shutdown of factories and the loss of jobs, affecting workers and companies worldwide. A disruption in trade relations between the two nations would have a significant impact on global markets, potentially leading to a global economic recession or depression. In terms of geopolitical ramifications, a US-China conflict would likely extend beyond the two nations themselves. Many other countries would be affected, either directly or indirectly by the conflict. The US has numerous allies in the Asia-Pacific region, including Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, while China has close ties with North Korea and other nations in the region. A conflict could draw in other nations, leading to a wider and potentially more destructive war. Comparison between a potential US-China conflict to other conflicts in history. Some have even compared this potential conflict to other major wars in history, such as World War I and II. While each of these conflicts is unique, there are some similarities that can be drawn between them and a hypothetical US-China war. One of the most significant similarities is the scale of the potential conflict. Both World War I and II were massive global conflicts that involved many countries and led to the loss of millions of lives. A US-China war would be similarly massive in scale, involving two of the world's largest military powers and leading to significant loss of life and destruction of critical infrastructure. In fact, many experts predict that a conflict between these two countries would be the most catastrophic war in human history. Another similarity between a US-China war and World War I and II is the impact it would have on the global economy. The two world wars led to massive economic disruptions as countries diverted resources towards the war effort, and the destruction of infrastructure and loss of life had significant long-term economic consequences. Similarly, a US-China war would disrupt global supply chains and lead to a significant loss of economic productivity and growth. However, there are also some differences between the US-China war and the two world wars. For example, the world is now more interconnected than ever before, with global supply chains, the internet, and other technologies linking people and countries in ways that were not possible during the two world wars. This interconnectedness would have both positive and negative implications for a potential US-China war. On the one hand, it could lead to a greater cooperation and diplomacy, as countries recognize the importance of working together to prevent a catastrophic war. On the other hand, it could also lead to more significant disruptions, as a conflict between the two countries would affect many countries around the world. In addition to the world wars, there are other historical conflicts that a US-China war could be compared. For example, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was a prolonged period of tension that lasted for decades, but didn't lead to a direct military conflict. Similarly, a US-China conflict could take the form of a prolonged period of tension and competition, with both countries engaging in cyber attacks, economic espionage, and other forms of subversive activity, potential allies for the United States and China. If a conflict were to break out between the US and China, it's likely that the two nations will seek the help of their allies. For the United States, potential allies could include countries such as Japan, South Korea, Australia, the United Kingdom, and members of NATO. The US has strong military alliances with Japan and South Korea, and these countries have been actively participating in joint military exercises with the US. Australia is also a close US ally, with the two countries sharing intelligence and participating in joint military operations. The United Kingdom has historically been a close ally of the US and is a member of NATO, which would likely provide military support in the event of a US-China conflict. In recent years, the US has maintained strong relationships with its allies, although there have been some tensions. For example, the US has had disagreements with South Korea over issues such as the cost of hosting US military bases, and there have been trade tensions with Japan. However, overall, the US has been able to maintain strong alliances with its key partners. On the other hand, potential allies for China could include countries like Russia, North Korea, Iran, Pakistan, and other countries that are part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO. Russia and China have developed closer ties in recent years, and the two countries have held joint military exercises. North Korea has historically been a close ally of China, and the two countries share a border. Iran and Pakistan have also developed closer ties with China investing heavily in both countries. In recent years, China has been working to develop stronger relationships with its allies, particularly through initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative. However, there have been tensions with some of its allies, particularly with India, which has been wary of China's growing influence in the region, exploring the possibility of a broader worldwide conflict in the event of a US-China war. Both the United States and China are global superpowers with immense military capabilities, and a direct military conflict between the two nations could have profound and far-reaching implications for the entire international community. To begin with, a US-China war could potentially trigger a global economic crisis. Both nations are major players in the global economy, and a war between them could disrupt international trade and investment flows, leading to a worldwide recession. For example, during the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a series of economic sanctions and embargoes that had significant negative effects on global trade and economic growth. Moreover, a US-China war could destabilize key regions worldwide, such as the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. These areas are already prone to conflict and instability, and a major conflict between the United States and China could exacerbate existing tensions and potentially trigger new conflicts. For instance, in the event of a US-China war, China may attempt to expand its sphere of influence in Southeast Asia, potentially leading to territorial disputes and military clashes with other regional powers. The Ukraine-Russia conflict could play another vital role in escalating the US-China war. China may decide to actively be involved and supply weapons and soldiers to Russia. Tensions between the US and Russia could potentially escalate if Russia perceives an opportunity to gain an advantage, while the US is preoccupied with China. A potential consequence of a US-China war is the escalation of cyber warfare and the use of emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence and unmanned systems. Both the United States and China have invested heavily in these areas, and a direct military confrontation could lead to the deployment of these technologies in ways that are currently unforeseen. For example, China may use unmanned systems to target US naval vessels, while the United States may use cyber attacks to disrupt critical Chinese infrastructure. Also, a US-China conflict could potentially exacerbate existing tensions between China and other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. China has been involved in territorial disputes with a number of neighboring countries, including Japan, Taiwan, and Vietnam. A US-China conflict could potentially embolden China to take a more aggressive stance on these issues, potentially leading to further conflict in the region. A US-China war could have profound impact on the global balance of power. Both nations have significant military capabilities, and a direct military conflict between them could fundamentally shift the balance of power in favor of one nation or the other.